What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Danielle Hallen, and I am back with another true crime video. You guys had an awesome response to my previous video. If you've not seen it, definitely go check it out. And just as a brief catch up, I am essentially going to be doing a new series on my channel, something I used to do a very long time ago, where I speak on different true crime cases that have either inspired a law or just have completely changed true crime in general. And you guys absolutely loved the idea. You've given me a lot of different suggestions of cases from your local area or things that have maybe personally impacted you. So I am very, very appreciative of that and so excited to keep moving forward with that series. Now, this video in particular is not a part of that series. This is an unsolved murder. It's a lesser known case and it's remained pretty much silent since it happened. Hopefully spreading awareness, putting the story back out there, giving it a permanent place to live will help bring answers and justice to her and her family. Now, before I get into the details of the case, I would like to thank Skillshare for partnering with me on today's video. Skillshare is an online learning community filled with thousands and thousands of classes to help bring out your creativity and connect you with like-minded individuals. I'm personally someone that loves to learn everything possible. I don't think I will ever get tired of learning new things. I like to learn how to DIY anything I possibly can. The world is your classroom, and Skillshare can help you with that. It can help you expand your hobbies that you're interested in, or if you want to build onto existing knowledge, there's definitely going to be a class for you and a plethora of different categories to choose from. Things like creative writing, film and video, animation, photography. If you want to learn how to bake, if you want to start your own podcast. Classes are broken up into segments, which I personally really enjoy. You're able to take things at your own pace. I'm the kind of person that has very specific things in a subject that I want to learn, so I can kind of skip ahead, or if I'm struggling with a certain part, I can go to the very specific segment. And I also really love the community engagement in each class where you can get feedback from others that have taken the class along with you, or maybe just some encouragement if you need it, if you're feeling like you're just not accomplishing things the way that you want to. There's a great support group within Skillshare's community to help encourage you to keep pushing forward. I'm taking a pretty awesome class called Dynamic Brand Identity, Designing Logos That Evolve by Paula Scher. She's actually one of the world's most acclaimed graphic designers. I'm in the process of trying to design a logo for my farm so we can start marketing our goods, but I cannot for the life of me settle on one design that fits across all mediums. It's kind of hard to go from rustic outdoor sign to an Instagram logo. This class is a super in-depth look into the best ways to go about creating exactly what I need. The first 1,000 of my viewers to sign up through my link in the description box down below will get a 1-month free trial to Skillshare so that you can start exploring your creativity today. And if you do that, make sure to let me know the classes that you took down below so maybe I can check it out in my free time as well. Thank you again to Skillshare for partnering with me on today's video. Brands like them allow me to do what I do and give back to these families as much as I possibly can. And now on to today's case. So, Faye Dollar was 38 years old at the time she was murdered in Atlanta, Georgia in November into December of 1980. As I stated, there is not much information at all about this case online, including who Faye was, which is the most irritating thing for me because I hate more than anything not being able to include in my videos the history of those that I speak about, the things that they loved, what their daily life was like. I really like to try to put a person to this name and the story that I'm telling because they're so much more than a victim. But unfortunately, I'm working with a handful of old archived articles, so I don't know a whole ton, but what I do know, and from the things that I've seen said about her, she was a loving wife, a loving mother, and an amazing teacher. So Faye worked at Feldwood High School as a math teacher, and everyone that had the pleasure of either being her coworker or being in her class absolutely loved her. Her face was plastered all over the papers after her death, and in each and every single one, she was described as a beloved math teacher to the students that so looked up to her. She had a huge impact on her community. She just seemed very dedicated to those around her with a huge heart and a lot of passion for what she did. She was also married to a very well-known basketball coach. His name is Donald Dollar. He worked at another high school, Douglas High School, where he coached the Astros, which was the basketball team there, and they had 2 boys together, a 4-year-old named Cameron and a 9-year-old named Chad. There are a lot of contradictory articles and blogs out there about this, and a lot of them had that flipped where the 9-year-old was Cameron and the 4-year-old was Chad, but this is what I saw in majority of the different articles with interviews with them, so that is my guess as to what is correct. Both Donald and Faye made sure to instill the exact same passion they had for all of the things that they loved into their boys as well. Now, unfortunately, I don't know much more about their life. They both had been in their careers for an incredibly long time. They loved what they did. They seemed to be this picturesque family, but unfortunately, the couple did begin to have troubles in their marriage. And ultimately, this led to a divorce in September of 1980, just 2 months prior to Faye's death. The divorce was finalized. Faye ended up with custody of both of the boys. I don't know if it's like full-on custody or if there was some just like split agreement where she had majority of the custody. It can get really complicated, but she was living at 378 King Henry Road Southwest in Atlanta. And another thing that I wonder, and I'll kind of get deeper into why I wonder this later on, I don't know if this is a home that she had recently moved in or if this was the family home they had been living in and she just remained there. That's where she was those 2 months prior to her death. There are no details at all as well about the marriage troubles that they were having, which may or may not be relevant. I don't know if we'll ever know. And I also am unsure of what Faye's mindset was like prior to her death. But what I do know is that the divorce itself was not at all an easy process, which honestly, no one expects divorce to be an easy process. And many people ended up getting caught up in the emotions in the aftermath of Faye and Donald's divorce. So as I said, they both were very well known, well loved in the community. They, had created these families at the high schools that they worked at. He's a coach and I'm sure he's close with the kids and their families and all of these things. So those that were close to them hated seeing them go through this divorce. And I'm sure if any of you have been kind of in a situation like that, it sometimes can feel like it's like one side or the other, or if there's any tension, it can create issues and friendship problems. And that was a lot of what was going on, ended up happening even more so later down the road. Those that knew them best also stated that their relationship during this time became very tumultuous. And I don't know if there were any issues prior to this, but according to those close to Donald and Faye, police were called out multiple times during the divorce to the Dollar home for domestic disputes. I don't know if there were ever any arrests or anything linked to this, or if they were basically just fighting and then told to split ways and calm down. I tried to find any sort of documentation for this, but I could not find anything available. And also, according to Donald, it was clear that Faye had a lot of strong negative feelings toward him during the divorce. He has claimed in a handful of different articles that Faye had gone to her close friends and family during the divorce, telling them that he had been treating her badly, that he was a bully, just this awful person. And this is something that Donald has since denied repeatedly. But unfortunately, Faye's not here to tell her side anymore, and there's not a lot of documentation. Can't really give you any more information on that. But once the divorce was settled and things were slowly starting to calm down, they were trying to get into their new routines, everything seemed all right. I've not seen anyone spoken to that claimed those 2 months were problematic or there was anything strange going on, but somehow, some way, something managed to happen to Faye on Saturday, November 30th, 1980. That night, Faye had her typical nighttime routine with the boys. She put both of them to bed just around 9 p.m. And after that, everything is really up in the air. The following morning, both boys woke up and noticed that their mother was nowhere to be found in the house. She wasn't in her bedroom. She wasn't making breakfast. There were absolutely no signs of her. And her gold Monte Carlo was also missing from the driveway. And this was completely out of the norm. She was always there for them. As I said, she was a very attentive and great mother. So this was not like Faye. Immediately, the boys called their father, Donald, on the phone, and they're like, look, mom's not here, her car's not here, something's not right, there's no note, no nothing. So right away, Donald called the Atlanta Police Department and reported Faye as missing. Investigators showed up to the home initially not exactly knowing what to expect, and once the information started to pile up, it became pretty clear to them that something had likely happened to Faye. Boys told authorities all about the day prior and that she had put them to bed just before 9, online, they said that when she put them to bed that night, she was wearing a red dress. So that was the description that they really were kind of putting out there at the time. When they checked around the entire house, there were no signs that I know of that she had taken anything. All of her jewelry that she loved was still there. Even her jacket was still there. It appeared that she had just stepped out for a moment, and for some reason she had not come back. There was nothing at all that would have indicated to authorities or anyone that knew Faye that she intended to be gone for any sort of period of time. Plus, she never would have left her children alone at the home. They also received a call from her work. Faye was supposed to come in for a little bit that day, and she had no call, no showed, which in the 13 years that she had been working in this position, she had never done that a single time. Not only was she a responsible parent, she was also a responsible employee. So at this point, police stated that they believed it was likely foul play was involved because that's what all of the signs were pointing towards. So really the only theory that anyone had to go off of at this point was that maybe Faye had to run an errand. Maybe she just had to go out real quick and grab something and plan to be back, and something happened to her along the way, or maybe she was forced out of her house somehow and then something happened to her. Donald gave police a description of Faye's car, the gold Monte Carlo, and also gave them her license plate number, and they immediately put out a bolo in hopes that she would be spotted somewhere. Unfortunately, Donald had given them the wrong license plate number, so police had been out looking for the wrong car the entire time, and unfortunately that lost them a lot of very critical time that they needed to be able to look for her. Thankfully, once this was noticed, they were able to immediately fix it and put out a new bolo, and just shortly after this, sure enough, Faye's car ended up being found. Around 7:30 p.m. on December 4th, just a few days after Faye had been reported missing, Officer J.A. Swope was out doing his typical rounds, and one of the specific places that he would check was Admiral Benbow Inn at 1470 Spring Street, Northwest Atlanta. When he pulled into the inn, he immediately noticed a gold Monte Carlo that matched the description of Faye's vehicle. He went ahead and compared the plates, and sure enough, he found Faye's car. Now, this inn is about 15 miles away from Faye's home, and according to what Google Maps tells me, it can be over a 30-minute drive if there's a lot of traffic. It is quite literally on the other side of Atlanta. So you'd have to drive through the bulk of Atlanta, which if you've done that before, you know it can be an absolute nightmare and take forever. So it was quite a far drive. This wasn't indicative of her just simply running out for errands. So did she drive herself there, or did something happen to her and the car was just dropped there? Right away, investigators arrived on scene to try to process the car. It appeared to simply be abandoned in the parking lot. I have not seen that there was any damage noticed to the car. The police tried to figure out how long the car had been there. Now, according to security working at the inn, they had done nightly rounds on Tuesday night, so 2 nights prior, and they did not remember seeing the car in the inn parking lot at that time. Police also decided to speak to the different residents that were all on their balconies and staring, trying to figure out what was going on, and none of them remembered seeing the car there even earlier that day. So it seemed like the car had only been in the lot for a few hours at that point. The manager of the inn, Jerry Gibbons, said, quote, "We don't know a thing. All I know is that police found the car out there. No one in the hotel heard anything unusual." He went to check for the guests at the inn to see if Faye had maybe checked in there or something. She was not a registered guest, so it really did just seem like this car had just been dropped off that night and left days after Faye disappeared, and no one knows what happened in between then. Basic forensic testing was done on the car right then and there. They wanted to go ahead and fingerprint it, do everything they could, and then they called a wrecker service out to take the car, collect it, and impound it for further testing. But once the wrecker service was there, they told them, the trunk is locked and we cannot get into it. There's no key or anything. Will you unlock it for us? Can you force this open? Wrecker service managed to pry the trunk open, and when they did, they found Faye's body. Faye was face down in the trunk of her own car, and her body was kind of resting slumped over this spare tire in her trunk. Her body had very likely been there for some period of time because there was a large imprint on her abdomen from where she had been resting over the tire. From the way it's described, and it's not specific, so again, take this with a grain of salt, It doesn't seem she was wearing anything. What they did say was that the red dress she was thought to have been wearing that night was nowhere to be found. There was no other clothing around her, anything like that. So while they didn't specifically say she was completely undressed, that's just kind of the way it seems to be described. Her hair was also up in curlers, indicating that she had likely been trying to go to bed or was planning on going to bed soon and not planning to go out and do anything. And she also was apparently wearing a gold chain around her neck. So I don't know if they stated that because it doesn't seem that theft was a motive there, that someone likely would have taken it. I'm not sure. That's just the information that's been put out there. Police also announced that they had found a handful of Faye's items near her car. I don't know how close exactly. I don't know exactly what the items were. Faye also had a very obvious wound to her head, but it was not clear at the time exactly what it was from. Sergeant D.L. Pike said, quote, "I'm at a loss right now as to what that wound could be from. I don't see anything around it to indicate it is a gunshot wound." So as you can see at this point, police are completely puzzled. They don't know how she ended up this far away from home. They really don't know what the motive is. Clearly, this is a homicide, but why exactly? What on earth lured her out of her home that night? There were just so many questions that needed to be answered. Faye's remains at this point were sent off for an autopsy, and Dr. Robert R. Stivers was the one who performed it, and he ended up finding that she had died from blunt force trauma to her head. Someone had used some sort of object to hit Faye incredibly hard on the left side of her head at her ear, and that is what ultimately ended up killing her. Dr. Stiver also confirmed that she had been deceased for a few days at the point that she was found, so that paired with the fact that she had this imprint on her abdomen really suggests that Faye had been in that trunk for days at some other location, and then all of a sudden was brought to this inn the night that she was found. Now, this really gets my brain going because I unfortunately don't know if the bolo was made public or not. If it was, it's very likely someone heard that the accurate description was finally being plastered everywhere for Faye's car and they realized that they had to quickly get rid of it. Or maybe it's just one huge coincidence that the car popped up in some random location hours before being found after all the information was corrected. But either way, someone had to have dropped it off and they would have had to leave that area. So they either left on foot, which would make them much more visible and make it more likely there was a sighting of someone, or more than one person was potentially involved and there was someone there waiting in a getaway vehicle, which again would kind of lessen the chances there was a sighting, but it also is helpful because that's more than one person that could eventually crack and say something. The inn is also in a very kind of strange location, at least in my opinion. It's tucked away on the outskirts of Atlanta, and from what I was able to see, it has been torn down. At least that's what it looks like on Google Maps, and it's surrounded by multiple very large highways and kind of main strips. So if someone was on foot and had to walk away from this area, I highly doubt they're going to take the highway. There are a few neighborhoods that they could have gone through, but there's also some pretty large businesses and gas stations and things like that that someone may have walked through at that point in time. Unfortunately, if we again go the other route, that there could have potentially been a getaway driver there, being so close to the highways, it would have taken nothing at all to very easily escape and no one see a thing. But with how big Atlanta is, I honestly feel like whoever dropped the car off in this very specific location was familiar with this area and may live close by or work close by, something along those lines, because this inn is tucked in such a strange way. It's kind of difficult to get to the inn. You have to be specifically going there. Again, I'm judging all of this off of Google Maps, so if you live there, don't get angry with me if I'm wrong. That's just what it seems to look like. So I don't think someone would purposely go there without knowing it's there, being familiar with the area, and knowing there's highways there to get away quick if you're in a vehicle. After the autopsy was complete, Dr. Stiver told the Atlanta Constitution that they actually did have a good idea of what the weapon was that had been used to fatally injure Faye, and that was a really big deal. So clearly, whatever marking it ended up making on her was distinguishable enough that they knew what had been used. But because they had so little to go off of in this entire case, they kept that information tight to the vest and would not share it with anyone so they didn't compromise the case. And still to this day, we don't know what the weapon was. Which I will say, I kind of have conflicted feelings with that, especially in a case like this where there's not a lot of information out there. I completely understand wanting to protect the integrity of the case, but at the same time, it's very likely, since this car was dumped, that so was the murder weapon. And if the community may have possibly known what that weapon could have been, someone could have been keeping an eye out for it. And maybe it would have been found, and that would have led to whoever attacked Faye. Again, I feel like that's like in a world where everything goes perfect and all murderers are caught. So I do understand why police wanted to keep that information to themselves. But as I'm sure you can imagine, Donald was one of the first people that police looked into. Now, I do want to state that does not necessarily mean they had anything other than the history that they knew about them to suggest he had done anything to her. This is just a very common practice. I feel like that's not well known enough, so that's why I've been trying to reiterate it a lot in my more recent videos, that there's usually a certain way these things go. And according to statistics, current data suggests that 1 in 5 homicide victims have been killed by their intimate partner. And more specifically, over half, like way over half, I even saw a number of like 82% on one website of all female homicide victims were killed by their intimate partners. That is why very commonly you see the husbands or wives or things like that looked into first when something like this happens. It's similar to when children go missing, usually the parents are the first ones to be questioned. Before I get off into way too big of a tangent, they decided to look at Donald. They brought him in for questioning fairly quickly, and he essentially ended up becoming a gigantic target, not just by the police, but by the public. Many people believed that he played a part in Faye's death for a multitude of very understandable reasons. Obviously, they had just gotten a divorce. That right there could be a big motive. Maybe he's upset. Maybe he didn't want a divorce. What were these issues from? Had there been infidelity going on? Was there a jealousy problem? Could run on endlessly. So that was obviously a huge speculation that a lot of people had. On top of that, it had been made well-known knowledge from those that were very close to Faye and also Donald that there were the police called multiple times to the home for domestic disputes during the divorce. Obviously, there was a lot of tension and anger here, so that's something that is questionable. And then a lot of people also question the fact that he gave the wrong license plate number. Maybe this was like a distraction technique. From what I have seen, even Faye's family also were some of the first to point the finger at Donald as potentially being involved in whatever may have happened to Faye. Donald told the Atlanta Constitution, quote, "During the time Faye and I were having trouble, she convinced some of her friends that I was bad to her, that I was a bully, so naturally, when the tragedy happened, her friends and families assumed I did it." He was very open and acknowledged the fact that he understood exactly how a majority of people were coming to this conclusion, that he understood where the speculation was coming from, that things did look strange, but he reassured everyone that he had absolutely nothing to do with whatever happened to Faye, and he was going to make it a point to prove that. He went in to speak to authorities multiple times between the time Faye disappeared and her remains were found up until just before Christmas of that year, so that whole entire month they had been questioning him. According to him, he also took polygraph tests. I don't know what the results of those were. Again, those are things that I take with a grain of salt anyways. And ultimately, the police never ended up calling him a suspect. It doesn't seem that they had anything at all to make them feel like he had participated in whatever had happened to Faye. However, they also really haven't said anything either to clear him, at least not that I have been able to find. They very well could have, but again, we're working with very limited information here. But the public, on the other hand, was not going to let him off very easily. At this point, Donald now had custody of both of the boys. They are all trying to piece their life back together. They lost their mother. You know, they had recently gone through a divorce, Donald and Faye, but I am sure he's also struggling. That's not something, those feelings don't just go away in a matter of moments. But unfortunately, during this time of trying to grieve and, process what was going on, they were constantly being bombarded with threatening phone calls. Donald was very worried about the safety of himself and the safety of his children. During all of this, while all of this is going on, while the investigators are trying to figure out who on earth would have harmed Faye, while he's now having to take sole custody of the children, he was still working his job to be able to pay his way through being a single parent. He even had to coach a game the day after his ex-wife's body was found. So there was just a lot going on, and he was struggling to put on a brave face. His team was tanking and apparently losing all of their games left and right. And he also was being threatened in ways that made him scared to coach, scared to continue on his job. Like I said, there were these calls coming into his home threatening him, and a lot of them specifically said that he was an easy target when his back was turned to the crowd. So while he's trying to provide for his children and move forward, he's also coaching this team while hoping there's not someone standing behind him in the crowd ready to kill him, assuming that he had killed his wife. Donald said, quote, "I like to think I was a kind, quiet guy. I've always liked to keep to myself and be with my family. Then one day you look up and your life is front page news, and people you thought were friends are saying awful things about you. The police are questioning you and your life is being threatened on the phone. It's quite an experience." He ended up late to a whole bunch of games in order to stay with his children, to ensure that they were safe, to be at the police station, to answer any sort of questions. And ultimately, in 1991, Donald ended up being fired by the principal of Douglas High School due to, quote, poor principal-coach relationship. But according to Donald, he said, quote, "Statements were made that I was too controversial." During this time, it just does not seem like there is much going on in Faye's case. It doesn't seem like there were any tips that led to any sort of answers, that there was any more evidence that was found. I don't know how many more people were questioned. I don't know what theories were ruled out or not. And there's not a lot that even Donald or his children said publicly about what exactly was going on with the investigation. And eventually the entire case just ended up going cold. At this point, the articles about Faye's disappearance can only be found on archived websites. There are a handful of amazing bloggers out there that have helped to put her story back on the internet in the minds of those that may have information. But that's one of the worst things, in my opinion, to see when it comes to a missing persons case. And sometimes I've seen this happen within just months of the person going missing or being murdered, when things just start to fall off the internet. These archive websites where you can go back and look at all these old news articles and things, they're so incredibly important. There's so many times important information, and in this case, pretty much all of the information cannot be found just by the general public looking on a quick Google search. No one would know that this woman was murdered and her case was still unsolved. And because the police are not coming forward and saying anything at all, I don't know. There's a level of frustration in terms of that. I wish at this point, after so many years that have passed, that police would come forward, throw out something, throw out some sort of bait here to get people to start talking about it again, give some little tidbit of information that could maybe trigger a memory, make someone scared and uncomfortable so that they're more likely to mess up and say something to someone. From looking at the location of Faye's home, which again, I will have pictures of this available, I don't know how likely it is that she went out real quick to run an errand, which seems to be the main thing that is said when you do find anything on Faye's case. It was late at night. She had curlers in her hair. The nearest gas station was at least 5 minutes away. And again, I am looking at that from decades in the future. There's no telling where the nearest gas station may have been back in the 80s. Her youngest son was also 4, and while I know times were different back then, I just don't know how comfortable she would have been leaving him at the house for, in the middle of the night for a period of time. Also, I decided to go back and check the weather for this day, since she was apparently just wearing this thin red dress, and the Hartsfield-Jackson airport said that the low that day was like 30 degrees. I think the high was 60 something, but at 9 p.m. that night, the sun would have already set, and my guess would be that it was maybe in the 40s, low 40s into the upper 30s. If she went out to run an errand real quick, like it's been suggested, I feel like she would have at least thrown a coat on real quick. But again, her coat was left behind. So that really leads me to wonder, did someone knock on her door? What would have made her go outside for a brief moment with curlers in her hair and just a thin dress on? If she had in fact gone to run an errand at a local convenience store, it's Saturday night, 9 p.m. in Atlanta, Georgia. There's plenty of people out that would have seen something. So again, the fact that there's just nothing out there, either people are scared to come forward or she wasn't seen because that's not what she had been doing at the time. A lot of this leads me to believe that whoever may have done something to Faye was likely someone she knew and trusted. But when it comes to potentially being someone close to her, obviously there is her husband. And I completely understand why people are making these assumptions and believing he could possibly be involved. But at the same time, the police have never named him a suspect. And from what I know, they dug into him pretty deep to see if he could have been involved. Was there someone at her job that maybe had interest in her and jumped at the moment to, speak to her or try to make a move when her divorce was finalized? She was a beautiful woman. Completely see that as being possible. That's also why I wondered how long she had been at that particular home. Was there maybe a neighbor that was a new neighbor if she had just moved into the house and this person realized her schedule and that she was there alone a lot of the time with just the kids, and maybe they came over and knocked on the door real quick, something along those lines. Even if she hadn't just moved in there and it had been somewhere that they had lived for a long period of time, there still could have been some strange neighbor that, noticed that Donald was gone and they took advantage of that. I just feel like none of these theories necessarily fit very well, because if she had gone out at that time of night in a red dress and curlers, someone would have remembered seeing her out running an errand. Was she at a stop sign and got attacked by some random stranger while she was stopped there? But in that case, wouldn't you assume that it likely would have been theft as the motive and her chain would have been gone? I don't know if she was sexually assaulted. There's nothing at all that mentions anything about that, but that could have also been a motive. I feel like this is just one of those cases where there's such little information that you can go on for days and days, but I will never believe that there is not someone out there that has information that can help solve this case. After this many years have passed, I just feel like there's no way someone involved did not say something off to someone else after all of this time. That is something that is incredibly common, a lot more common than people think. They have to say something. People cannot help but run their mouths. Anyone notice someone acting strange after her death? Someone at the school maybe, someone that they worked with, someone that stopped showing up for work, totally got a new job, pulled themselves away from friend circles. Her children did go on to live their dreams playing basketball and just being involved in basketball in every aspect of their life. Cameron ended up playing for UCLA and, quote, helped UCLA regain the NCAA throne. Chad also graduated from Milligan College, where he played basketball, and he did go on to be an assistant coach there at an incredibly young age, which was a huge accomplishment. And the entire time they were supported by their father. Donald continued to coach basketball as well and encourage his kids to chase their dreams just like Faye would have wanted. I genuinely hope that a cold case unit puts some manpower on this case and some fresh eyes, especially with DNA technology going the way it is. I feel like, unfortunately, cases like this can get so easily shoved under the rug. If there was a sexual assault or something and we don't know about it, there could just be DNA sitting somewhere in a lab or in an evidence box that's just waiting to be tested and, for people to use genealogy on it or something along those lines to finally find justice for Faye and for her family. And without these cases remaining in the eye and these reminders that, hey, these people still don't have answers, this victim still has no justice, they may continue to just fade into the background even more. So that is why I wanted to make sure that I put this case out for you guys today. Faye was so loved in her community and she deserves the effort put into solving her case. On that note, that is all that I have for you guys today. As always, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Faye's story. Make sure to spread this if you were in the Georgia area or just in general to make sure that Faye is not forgotten, and hopefully so that measures can be taken to potentially relook into her case and get some answers. Also, if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below to become a part of the Helen fam so that we can hopefully bring them home together or bring them justice together, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.